What if everything we know about the pyramids is wrong? Not just missing pieces or incomplete facts, but completely wrong from the very start. The pyramids of Giza, the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx, and the ancient rooms carved deep into solid rock have been standing for thousands of years before the first pharaoh became king, before Egyptian writing was invented, and even before Egypt itself existed as a memory. Look at the proof we've been ignoring. The Sphinx has marks from heavy rain that hasn't fallen on this desert in 9,000 years. The Great Pyramid contains math formulas that no 4th dynasty priest should have known, like pi, phi, and the exact size of Earth. Inside its tunnels, there are no hieroglyphs, no mummies, and no treasures, only silence, perfect measurements, and locked doors leading to rooms we are not allowed to explore. Even ancient Egyptian texts admit these monuments were already ancient when their kings discovered them. So if Khufu didn't build the Great Pyramid, who did? And why has this possibility been hidden as deeply as the chambers buried beneath the sand? Night falls over the Giza plateau, and the ancient stones begin to glow. The setting sun turns the limestone golden, painting long shadows across the sand. The Sphinx crouches at the edge of the cliff, staring at the eastern horizon, its body half buried, and its face marked by forces that shouldn't exist here. Behind it, the 3 pyramids rise in perfect alignment, their sharp angles cutting against the darkening sky. Their presence is so huge that distance itself seems to bend around them. The last tour buses drive away. Voices fade into the desert wind. And in the quiet that follows, something changes. The monuments stop being tourist attractions and become what they have always been: mysteries carved in stone, waiting in silence. For many years, we've been taught a simple story. The pyramids were built by the Egyptians of the 4th dynasty around 2580 BC. Pharaoh Khufu ordered the building of the Great Pyramid as a tomb to help him pass into the afterlife. Tens of thousands of workers pulled 2.3 million limestone blocks up ramps, shaping them with copper tools, and nothing but human strength and royal power. His son Khafre built the 2nd pyramid and carved the Sphinx to look like himself. The 3rd pyramid was built under Menkaure. Together, they represent the highest point of Egyptian engineering, proof of what a united kingdom could accomplish. It's a story of victory, stone and hard work, kings and forever. Textbooks repeat it, museums display it, and tour guides tell it every day to visitors who stand amazed beneath the towering monuments. But the desert remembers differently. As twilight settles and the wind moves softly through the ancient stones, doubts rise like shadows. What if this story isn't wrong, but incomplete? What if the Egyptians didn't build these structures but inherited them, restoring what was already ancient, claiming what had been standing for thousands of years before their civilization even existed? This question isn't born from fantasy. It comes from strange facts that don't fit the official story, from evidence that whispers of a past far older and far stranger than anything history has prepared us for. Consider the Sphinx itself. Walk into the area surrounding it, and you'll see walls carved deep into the limestone bedrock. The stone isn't smooth. It's not worn by wind. It has deep vertical grooves, the clear sign of water erosion from heavy, long-lasting rainfall. The kind that takes centuries to carve rock. The kind that hasn't fallen on this plateau in nearly 9,000 years. Long before the first Egyptian dynasty, long before writing, long before the Nile settled into its current path. Rain fell here and a Sphinx was already standing. Or consider the Great Pyramid. Inside, there are no hieroglyphs, no inscriptions, no mummies, no burial goods, no ritual paintings or prayers for the dead, only granite chambers, passages that echo with sound, and a massive granite box without a lid. The structure contains pi, phi, Earth's polar radius, and the speed of light encoded in stone. Its passages line up with stars in ways that need astronomical accuracy far beyond anything credited to 4th dynasty Egypt. It's not a tomb. It's something else entirely. And then there are the sealed doors. In 1993, a robotic camera found a limestone door with copper handles deep inside a narrow shaft. When engineers drilled through it, they found a second door behind it. Radar scans showed empty spaces beneath the Sphinx and pyramid. Exploration stopped. Access was blocked. The questions remain unanswered. Even the Egyptians themselves left clues. The inventory stela describes Khufu not as the pyramid's builder, but as someone who repaired it. The dream stela shows Thutmose IV digging out the Sphinx from sand in forgotten times, as though it had been buried and uncovered across ages. These aren't the inscriptions of builders. They're the words of people who inherited these monuments, people who found structures already ancient and tried to preserve them. If this is true, if the pyramids and Sphinx existed thousands of years before ancient Egypt, then everything changes. Human history isn't a straight line from simple hunter-gatherers to civilization. It's a cycle. Cultures rise, achieve greatness, and disappear. Knowledge is discovered, forgotten, and rediscovered. The pyramids wouldn't mark the beginning of monumental building, but as survival relics from a lost age, preserved through disaster, waiting to be understood. The evidence doesn't live in just one place. It's scattered across fields of study that rarely talk to each other. Geology that reads rain marks in stone. Archaeology that uncovers mysteries too precise to explain. Mythology that remembers ages before the flood. Genetics that reveals ghost populations erased from history. Mathematics that encodes Earth's measurements and monuments supposedly built with copper tools. Piece by piece, these fragments form a shadow story, one that asks us to look past the convenient tale of kings and tombs and into a past far deeper than we've been taught. Tonight, we begin that journey. We'll walk through stone and erosion, through ancient texts and sealed chambers, through mathematics and mythology. We'll follow the evidence from Giza to Göbekli Tepe, from the Nile to the stars, from the surface of the plateau to the hidden spaces beneath it. Each step will circle back to the same haunting question: what if the Egyptians didn't build the pyramids? The sky darkens. The last light fades from the limestone. In this pause between day and night, the monuments seem to breathe with the weight of time, not 4,500 years, but perhaps 10,000, perhaps more. The pyramids endure, uncaring about our stories, their stones watching as empires bloom and collapse into dust. And if we listen closely, we can hear the silence not as emptiness, but as presence, an invitation, a question, a memory preserved in geometry and stone. The Sphinx waits. The pyramids loom. Our investigation has only begun. If this investigation into forgotten history speaks to you, consider subscribing to join us on future journeys into mysteries that lie just beyond the edges of accepted knowledge. Dropping a like will help others discover these hidden stories, and your thoughts in the comments become part of the ongoing search for truth. Also, let us know where you are and what time it is in your city right now. I'd love to hear from you. Now let the evidence speak. Ahead lies the first piece of evidence, the one that cannot be explained away. The one written in water and stone. The geological proof that the Sphinx existed thousands of years before Egypt itself. The morning sun climbs over the plateau, and the Sphinx emerges from shadow. From a distance, it appears timeless, eternal, as though it has always occupied this edge of the desert. But distance hides truth. To understand what the Sphinx reveals, you must ascend into the enclosure that surrounds it, the deep rectangular pit carved into the limestone bedrock. The walls that frame the monument like the sides of an ancient quarry. Step down into that space, and the air grows cooler. The walls rise high on either side, blocking the wind, surrounding you in stone. Run your hand along the surface, and you feel something unexpected, not the sharp edges of carved rock, not the smooth polish of crafted masonry, but deep irregular grooves, vertical channels, rounded edges, rippling surfaces that look like frozen waves. This is not the work of human tools. This is the signature of water. In 1990, Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University, stood in this same enclosure and saw what Egyptologists had missed for decades. Trained to read stone the way historians read scrolls, Schoch recognized the erosion patterns immediately. The limestone walls surrounding the Sphinx showed the clear marks of long-term water weathering, deep vertical cracks, carved by centuries of rainfall. The kind of erosion that happens when water flows steadily over rock, cutting downward, with patient, unstoppable force. But there was a problem, a big, unsettling problem. The Giza Plateau hasn't had rainfall of that strength for nearly 9,000 years. The climate record is clear. Around 10,000 BC, as the last ice age ended, North Africa was green. Rivers flowed where sand now stretches to the horizon. Grasslands covered the Sahara. Hippos waded through lakes that no longer exist. Rain fell regularly and heavily, shaping the landscape over thousands of years. But around 7,000 to 5,000 BC, the climate changed. The monsoons moved away. The Sahara began turning into desert. By the time the 4th dynasty came to power in 2580 BC, the Giza Plateau was already dry, already the desert we see today. If the Sphinx enclosure shows evidence of water erosion needing centuries of rainfall, then the monument must have been carved and exposed to the weather during that earlier wetter climate thousands of years before Kafur, thousands of years before Egypt itself existed as a united kingdom. Schoch's findings weren't based on guessing. They were rooted in geological comparison, the same methods used to date erosion patterns in canyons, riverbeds, and cliffs around the world. He looked at the weathering on the Sphinx body and enclosure walls, and compared it to weathering on nearby structures. His building dates are firmly known. The Old Kingdom temples built during the 4th dynasty structures, definitely dated to the reign of Kafur, and his successors, show completely different erosion patterns. Their limestone surfaces are weathered horizontally, worn smooth by wind and sand. The result of 4,500 years of desert exposure. The edges are sharp where protected, worn where exposed. This is wind erosion, the slow grinding of airborne particles against stone, the expected wear pattern for monuments standing in a dry climate. But the Sphinx enclosure is different. Its walls show deep vertical grooves, rounded channels, and wave-like ripples, the clear result of water flowing downward, pulling, and carving the rock over long periods. Wind doesn't carve vertically. Sand doesn't create rounded cracks. Only water, persistent and heavy, can produce this type of erosion. The contrast is undeniable. Stand at the base of the Sphinx and look at the enclosure walls. Then walk a few hundred meters to the Valley Temple with its precisely fitted limestone covering. The temple shows 4,500 years of wind damage. The Sphinx enclosure shows something far older. Schoch's analysis suggested that the Sphinx body and enclosure were carved sometime between 7000 and 9000 BCE during the period when North Africa still received heavy rainfall. This would place the monument's origin in the pre-pottery Neolithic era, a time when human societies were only beginning to experiment with farming, when writing didn't exist, when Egypt as a civilization was still thousands of years from its birth. The implications are huge. If the Sphinx is 5,000, 6,000, or even 7,000 years older than ancient Egypt, then the monument isn't the work of Khafre or any pharaoh. It's a relic from a forgotten age, a survivor from a climate and culture entirely different from the one that later claimed it. The Egyptians would have found the Sphinx already standing, already ancient, already eroded by rains their own civilization never witnessed. This idea faced immediate pushback. Egyptologists argued that no advanced culture capable of carving such a monument existed in North Africa during the pre-pottery Neolithic. Mainstream archaeology maintains that monumental stone sculpture and large-scale construction only emerged with the rise of complex societies, hierarchies, and centralized states, none of which, according to the accepted timeline, existed before 4000 BC. But geology doesn't care about historical agreements. Rock records time with cold precision. The erosion patterns exist whether they fit our stories or not. And there's another detail that deepens the mystery. The Sphinx itself is carved from the living bedrock its body, shaped by removing limestone around it, rather than stacking blocks. The same bedrock forms the enclosure walls. When the monument was created, those walls would have been fresh, sharp, and newly exposed. Over time, weathering would affect both the Sphinx body and the enclosure walls in similar ways, since they're part of the same geological formation exposed at the same moment. What Schoch observed was consistent weathering across both the Sphinx and the enclosure walls, evidence that they weathered together under the same conditions for the same length of time. If the Sphinx had been carved in 2500 BC, the enclosure walls should show 4500 years of desert erosion, just like the nearby temples. Instead, they show far more extensive water weathering, showing exposure during a much earlier, wetter climate. The only way to explain this difference is to accept that the Sphinx is older, much older. Critics pointed to later repairs and changes made by Egyptian dynasties, arguing that restoration work might confuse the weathering patterns. But Schoch's analysis accounted for this. The core limestone of the enclosure walls beneath any later additions shows the primary water erosion. The later Egyptian stonework, clearly distinguishable by its tighter joints and different weathering, sits on top of the older rain-scarred bedrock like a patch on ancient fabric. Imagine what this means. Picture the Sahara not as a desert, but as a savanna green grassland stretching beneath seasonal rains, rivers carving paths through the landscape. And somewhere on a limestone plateau overlooking a fertile valley, someone carved a giant figure from the bedrock, a lion perhaps, or a creature we no longer remember, its face turned toward the rising sun. Centuries pass. The rains fall. The monument weathers. Civilizations rise and fall in cycles we can't trace. The climate shifts. The Sahara dries. The monument is buried, forgotten, rediscovered, buried again. By the time the Egyptians arrive, it's already ancient, its origins lost to time. They see it as a sacred relic, dig it out, restore it, perhaps recarve the head into a pharaoh's face, and add it to their own mythology. They didn't build it. They inherited it. This is what the stone reveals, not through hieroglyphs or inscriptions, but through the language of geology, a language that speaks in erosion patterns, climate records, and weathering signatures. The evidence is physical, measurable, and reproducible. The rain carved its testimony into the limestone long before any scribe learned to write. And if the Sphinx is indeed a survivor from a green Sahara civilization, then it stands as proof of something unsettling. Advanced human cultures may have existed far earlier than we've been taught. Not just villages or settlements, but societies capable of planning, carving, and creating monuments designed to last. The desert keeps its secrets, but stone doesn't lie. The vertical grooves in the enclosure walls remain silent witnesses to rains that fell when the Sahara was young, when the world was different, when someone stood on this plateau and carved a monument that would outlast their entire civilization. The Sphinx remembers what history forgot. And the rain, impossible, ancient, undeniable, remains written in the walls. Stone speaks in erosion patterns and weathering signatures. But the Egyptians left another kind of testimony, one carved deliberately into monuments, written on stone slabs, preserved in texts meant to proclaim the deeds of kings. And when you read those inscriptions carefully, something unexpected emerges. The Egyptians themselves never claimed to have built the Sphinx. In fact, their own records suggest they believed these monuments were already ancient when they found them. This isn't a modern theory. It's not guessing imposed onto silent stones. It comes directly from the inscriptions left by the pharaohs themselves, declarations carved in hieroglyphs, meant to be read forever, preserved on limestone tablets, standing in the shadow of the very monuments they describe. The most revealing of these texts is the inventory stela, discovered in the 19th century near the Great Pyramid, carved during the 26th dynasty around 670 BC. The stela tells about events credited to the reign of Khufu, the pharaoh traditionally credited with building the Great Pyramid around 2580 BC. But the inscription doesn't describe Khufu as a builder. It describes him as someone who repaired things. The text is clear. It states that Khufu discovered the Sphinx already standing, already ancient, buried to his shoulders in sand. According to the stela, Khufu cleared the sand away, restored the monument, and built a temple beside it to honor the gods. The inscription also mentions the pyramids as existing structures during Khufu's reign, not as projects he ordered. Read that again. According to this ancient Egyptian record, Khufu didn't build the Great Pyramid. He found it. Egyptologists have long dismissed the inventory stela as a later fake, a piece of propaganda created over 2,000 years after Khufu's death. They argue that the 26th dynasty, a period marked by attempts to bring back Egypt's former glory, produced many texts that romanticize the past, giving false histories to ancient kings to make contemporary rulers look better. But dismissal isn't explanation. If the stela is a fake, why would later Egyptians choose to make Khufu's legacy smaller? Why show him as someone who repaired instead of the architect of the greatest monument on earth? Propaganda typically makes achievements bigger, not smaller. If the goal was to glorify the 4th dynasty, why not proclaim Khufu as the supreme builder, the visionary who commanded the Great Pyramid's construction? The stela does the opposite. It frames Khufu as someone. It found monuments already standing, already in need of restoration. It suggests that even in his time, these structures were old enough to be buried, forgotten, and needing excavation. And the inventory stela isn't alone. Another inscription far more famous and equally revealing stands between the paws of the Sphinx itself. Known as the Dream Stela, it was put up by Pharaoh Thutmose IV around 1400 BC, over 1,000 years after Khufu's reign. The stela tells a story as a young prince, Thutmose fell asleep in the shadow of the Sphinx during a hunting trip. In his dream, the Sphinx spoke to him, promising kingship if he would clear away the sand that had once again buried the monument up to its neck. Thutmose obeyed. He dug out the Sphinx, restored it, and later became pharaoh. The Dream Stela celebrates this act of restoration, and the inscription specifically describes the Sphinx as being in a state of ruin and neglect, buried by the sands of the desert over which it had stood since time immemorial. Note the language, since time immemorial, not since the reign of my ancestor Khafre. Not built by the 4th dynasty. The text frames the Sphinx as something already ancient beyond memory, something that had stood so long it had been swallowed by the desert and forgotten. Why would Thutmose IV, a pharaoh ruling over 900 years after the supposed construction of the Sphinx, describe the monument as lost to time? If Khafre had carved it in 2500 BC, then by 1400 BC, it would have been roughly 1,100 years old, significant, but not ancient enough to be forgotten. The pyramids of the 4th dynasty were still remembered. The names of kings were still recited. Temples were still in use. So why was the Sphinx already buried, already neglected, already treated as something older than remembered history? The answer becomes clear when you step back and look at the broader pattern. Across multiple dynasties, across inscriptions separated by centuries, Egyptian texts consistently describe the Sphinx and the pyramids, not as creations of Egypt, but as inheritances from an earlier age. They speak of restoration, excavation, and rediscovery, not of original construction. This pattern is significant. The Egyptians were careful record keepers. They documented everything: wars, trade, temple construction, royal decrees, religious festivals. Pharaohs proclaimed their building projects with pride, listing every stone laid, every god honored, every enemy defeated. The walls of temples are covered with inscriptions celebrating the achievements of kings, often exaggerating their deeds to godlike proportions. And yet, when it comes to the greatest monuments at Giza, this proud record-keeping falls silent. There are no contemporary 4th dynasty inscriptions inside the Great Pyramid describing its construction. No detailed accounts of how the stones were quarried, transported, or assembled. No hieroglyphs proclaiming Khufu's vision or engineering genius. Just silence and later texts that speak of restoration rather than creation. Compare this to other Egyptian monuments. The Temple of Karnak has inscriptions detailing its expansion over centuries, listing kings who added columns, gateways, and sanctuaries. The mortuary temple of Ramesses II at Abu Simbel is covered with carvings proclaiming his victories and divine status. Even smaller tombs in the Valley of the Kings are filled with texts guiding the deceased through the afterlife, prayers carved into every surface. But the Great Pyramid, empty of inscriptions. The Sphinx. No creation myth, no builder's signature, only later texts describing rediscovery. This absence isn't an accident. It's a void where we expect to find certainty. And into that void, the later inscriptions whisper a troubling possibility: the Egyptians didn't build these monuments because they were already there when Egypt rose to power. Consider the implications. If the Sphinx was already buried and forgotten by the time of Thutmose IV, then it must have been standing for far longer than the conventional timeline allows. Monuments don't become ancient beyond memory in just 1,000 years, not in a culture that kept continuous written records, not in a civilization that revered its ancestors and preserved their names. But if the Sphinx had been standing for 5,000 years, for 7,000 years, for 10,000 years, then the phrase time immemorial begins to make sense. Then the burial in sand, the lack of memory about its origins, the repeated need for excavation and restoration, all of it fits a different story. A story in which the Sphinx existed before Egypt itself. The Egyptians found these monuments the way archaeologists find ruins today, as remnants of something older, something built by people whose names have been lost, whose purposes have faded into legend. They restored them. They honored them. They built temples around them. But they didn't build them. This is what their own inscriptions reveal if we're willing to read them without the bias of the modern story. The inventory stela and the dream stela aren't isolated oddities. They're evidence of a consistent tradition, one in which the pyramids and Sphinx were understood as legacies from a vanished age, not creations of the 4th dynasty. Why then does mainstream Egyptology insist that Khufu built the Great Pyramid and Khafre carved the Sphinx? The answer lies partly in the absence of alternative evidence. Without contemporary inscriptions, Egyptologists rely on circumstantial connections, the closeness of the pyramids to 4th dynasty burial sites, the stylistic similarities between certain statues and the Sphinx's head, and the logistical feasibility of the construction timeline. But circumstantial evidence isn't the same as proof. And when the Egyptians' own texts contradict the accepted timeline, we must ask whose story are we trusting? And why? The sun sets again over Giza, and the Sphinx returns to shadow. The dream stela stands silent between its paws, its hieroglyphs still readable after 3,400 years. The words remain time immemorial. Not recent. Not remembered. Not claimed. Even the Egyptians' masters of stone and record looked upon these monuments with awe and uncertainty. They saw themselves not as the architects of eternity, but as its caretakers. Not the creators of the Sphinx, but the ones who found it buried and forgotten, waiting beneath the sand. The monuments were already ancient when Egypt was young. The inscriptions say it. The geology confirms it. And the silence inside the pyramids, untouched by the boastful hand of any pharaoh, echoes with the same truth. These are not tombs of kings. They're relics of something older. And the Egyptians knew it. If the Egyptians inherited the monuments rather than built them, then the next question becomes unavoidable. What were these structures originally designed to do? To answer that, we must leave the desert sun behind and descend into the interior of the Great Pyramid itself, into passages carved with impossible precision, into chambers that challenge the logic of burial, into a silence that feels less like a tomb and more like a machine waiting to be understood. The entrance is narrow, steep, and suffocating. You descend through the original passage, hunched and careful, the limestone walls pressing close on either side. The air grows cooler. The sounds of the outside world fade. And then the passage opens, and you find yourself standing in the grand gallery, a corridor so vast, so architecturally sophisticated, that it stops you cold. The grand gallery rises nearly 30 feet high, its walls built in overlapping limestone slabs that narrow toward the ceiling, creating a structure both functional and mysterious. Each stone is cut with precision, measured in fractions of millimeters. The angles are perfect. The alignment is exact. And at the far end, the passage leads upward into the king's chamber, a room built entirely of red granite blocks, each weighing dozens of tons, fitted together so tightly that a blade can't slip between them. Stand in that chamber. Let the silence settle around you. And ask yourself, does this feel like a tomb? There are no hieroglyphs on the walls. No prayers for the dead. No painted murals showing the journey through the underworld. No inscriptions naming a pharaoh or calling on the protection of gods. Every other royal tomb in Egypt is filled with ritual texts, images, spells carved into stone to guide the deceased through the dangers of the afterlife. The walls of tombs in the Valley of the Kings are covered floor to ceiling with scenes from the Book of the Dead, protective deities, and declarations of divine kingship. But here, in the greatest monument ever built, there is nothing. Just smooth granite walls, a flat ceiling, and in the center of the room, a massive rectangular box carved from a single block of red granite. This box, often called a sarcophagus, has become the centerpiece of the tomb theory. Egyptologists argue that it was meant to hold Khufu's body, that grave robbers emptied it in ancient times, and that the pyramid's purpose is self-evident. But the box itself contradicts this interpretation. It has no lid. It never had one. The interior surfaces are rough, unpolished, unsuitable for holding a body wrapped in sacred linens. There are no inscriptions, no cartouches, no sign that it was ever used for burial. And here's the critical detail: the box is wider than the passages leading into the king's chamber. It couldn't have been brought in after the chamber was sealed. It must have been placed during construction, carved on site, or built into the structure from the beginning. This isn't how tombs are designed. Sarcophagi are brought in during burial, not embedded as architectural features. The granite box in the king's chamber functions more like a component of the pyramid's design than a burial object. And then there's the sound. In recent years, researchers studying the acoustic properties of the king's chamber discovered something extraordinary. The room resonates at a specific frequency 110 Hz. When sound is introduced, a voice, a drum, a tone, the granite walls amplify it, creating a harmonic resonance that vibrates through the stone and into the body of anyone standing inside. This frequency isn't random. Studies in neuroscience have shown that 110 Hz can change brain wave activity, causing states associated with meditation, trance, and heightened awareness. Was the chamber designed for this? Was it built to resonate, to amplify sound, to create an experience beyond the physical? If so, it wasn't a tomb. It was an instrument. The Grand Gallery, too, challenges barrier logic. Its angled walls create a space that amplifies sound, channeling acoustic waves upward and focusing them toward the king's chamber. Some researchers have proposed that the gallery once held wooden or metal resonators, devices that could vibrate at specific frequencies, turning the entire passage into a tuned acoustic chamber. The niches carved into the walls of the gallery along assumed to be symbolic may have been functional slots designed to hold parts of a novanished mechanism. Move deeper into the pyramid, and the strange facts multiply. Below the king's chamber lies the queen's chamber, another granite room with narrow shafts extending from its walls. These shafts don't lead outside. They were sealed from within, their purpose unknown. But when engineers measured their angles, they discovered something astonishing. The shafts align with specific stars, as they would have appeared in the night sky thousands of years ago. The southern shaft from the queen's chamber points towards Sirius. The northern shaft aligns with the star Thuban, which served as the North Star during the era when the Sahara was still green. These aren't random orientations. They're astronomically precise, calculated alignments that required knowledge of celestial mechanics, star positions, and the slow wobble of Earth's axis known as precession. Why would a tomb contain star shafts? Why point chambers toward constellations? The Egyptians associated certain stars with gods in the afterlife, but this level of precision goes beyond symbolism. These alignments suggest the pyramid was built by people who understood the heavens with scientific accuracy, who tracked the sky not for ritual alone, but for reasons we have yet to fully understand. And then there's the granite itself. The king's chamber is built from red swan granite, a stone rich in quartz crystal. Quartz is piezoelectric. It generates an electrical charge when subjected to pressure. The immense weight of the pyramid pressing down on the granite blocks would create continuous pressure, potentially generating weak electrical fields within the chamber. Combined with the acoustic resonance and star alignments, this raises a question archaeologists are reluctant to ask: was the Great Pyramid designed to harness energy? Not in the modern sense of power generation, perhaps, but in ways we don't yet understand, as a device for focusing sound, light, or electromagnetic fields, as a structure built according to principles of physics that align with natural forces, as a machine constructed for purposes that go beyond burial. The mathematical evidence supports this interpretation. The dimensions of the Great Pyramid encode information far beyond what a tomb requires. The ratio of its height to the perimeter of its base is exactly 2a grav, meaning the pyramid's proportions encode pi, the mathematical constant that defines circles and spheres. The height of the pyramid multiplied by 43,200 equals the polar radius of the Earth. The perimeter multiplied by the same number equals Earth's equatorial circumference. This isn't coincidence. The number 43,200 is significant in ancient astronomical systems, representing a fraction of the precession cycle, the 25,920-year wobble of Earth's axis. The builders encoded geodetic data, Earth's dimensions, into a structure supposedly built as a tomb for a single king. Why? The pyramid is also aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60th of a single degree more precise than most modern buildings. Achieving this requires advanced surveying, astronomical observation, and an understanding of Earth's rotation. The cardinal alignment isn't symbolic. It's functional, as though the pyramid was designed to interact with the planet's geometry. 5. The golden ratio appears in the pyramid's slope angle. The dimensions of the king's chamber reflect harmonic mathematical relationships. The structure is saturated with encoded information constants, ratios, and measurements that suggest the builders possessed knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and Earth's physical properties. If this was a tomb, why encode such information? Why build with such precision? Why align with stars and cardinal points? Why construct acoustic chambers in quartz-filled granite rooms? The evidence points in one direction: the Great Pyramid was not built as a tomb. It was built as something else: a scientific instrument, a resonant structure, a geodetic marker, a repository of knowledge preserved in stone. Tombs are places of ritual and memory. They're decorated, inscribed, filled with objects meant to serve the dead in the afterlife. The Great Pyramid contains none of this. It's silent, mathematical, precise. It speaks not in words but in proportions, frequencies, and alignments. It feels less like a burial chamber and more like a blueprint, a structure designed to communicate information to whoever has the knowledge to read it. Walk out of the pyramid and into the desert sun, and the question follows you: if it wasn't a tomb, then what was it? What were the builders trying to achieve? What knowledge were they preserving? And why, after all this time, do we still refuse to see the pyramid for what it plainly is? Not a tomb. A machine. A monument to a science we've forgotten. A message encoded in stone, waiting for someone to understand. The silence inside the pyramid isn't the silence of death. It's the silence of something waiting, something unfinished, something still resonating with purpose. Even now, after thousands of years of neglect, we've only begun to listen. If the Great Pyramid isn't a tomb and its chambers were designed for purposes we don't yet understand, then the next question becomes critical: what else lies hidden inside? For over a century, explorers assumed the pyramid's interior had been fully mapped: 3 main chambers, a handful of passages, and nothing more. But in 1993, a German engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink sent a small robot into a shaft where no human could follow. And what it discovered changed everything. The shaft in question extends from the Queen's Chamber, one of the pyramid's central rooms. It's barely 8 inches square, far too narrow for any person to enter, too small even for a child. For decades, Egyptologists dismissed these shafts as symbolic, calling them air shafts or soul shafts, designed to allow the pharaoh's spirit to rise to the stars. But if that were true, why were they sealed from within? Why build passages that lead nowhere? Gantenbrink designed a small robotic crawler equipped with a camera and lights. He called it Upuat, after the Egyptian god who opens the way. On March 22, 1993, the robot entered the southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber and began its slow climb. The camera sent grainy footage back to monitors outside the pyramid: smooth limestone walls, tight angles, the shaft climbing steadily upward into darkness. And then, 65 meters into the passage, the robot stopped. Blocking the way was a limestone door, not a collapsed section, not debris, a door deliberately placed, carefully fitted, with 2 copper pins or handles sticking out from its surface. The door was polished smooth, set flush into the shaft walls, clearly intentional. It wasn't designed to keep people out. No person could fit in the shaft in the first place. It was designed to seal something in. The discovery was immediately controversial. If the pyramid was simply a tomb, why would its builders construct narrow shafts leading to sealed doors deep inside the structure? What purpose could they serve? And more importantly, what lay beyond them? For nearly a decade, the door remained untouched. Requests to explore further were delayed, postponed, tangled in red tape. Finally, in 2002, a team led by Dr. Zahi Hawass, then Egypt's chief archaeologist, received permission to drill a small hole through the door using a fiber optic camera. The event was televised live, broadcast to millions of viewers, as though the pyramid's greatest secret was about to be revealed. The camera pushed through the hole. The lens adjusted. And on the other side of the first door, barely inches away, was a second door. Another limestone block. Another barrier. Sealing the shaft even deeper into the pyramid. The broadcast ended abruptly. The investigation was closed. No further exploration was allowed. The second door remains untouched. The shaft remains sealed. And the questions remain unanswered. Why build a door inside a passage no human can enter? Why place a second door immediately behind the first? If these shafts were symbolic, why seal them so deliberately? And why, when modern technology finally allowed exploration, did access suddenly become blocked? The pattern repeats across the pyramid. In the northern shaft of the Queen's Chamber, explorers found a similar setup: a narrow passage leading upward, a metal object embedded in the stone, and once again, blocked access, preventing further investigation. Radar scans conducted in the 1980s and again in the 2000s revealed strange things throughout the pyramid: voids, chambers, empty spaces that don't appear on any architectural plan. Some scans showed hollow spaces beneath the king's chamber. Others detected large voids within the pyramid's core masonry, spaces that shouldn't exist if the structure is simply a solid stack of limestone blocks. But each time these strange things are detected, exploration stops. Access is denied. The data is classified or dismissed, and the official story remains unchanged: the pyramid is a tomb, fully explored, holding no further secrets. Ascend beneath the Giza plateau itself, and the mystery deepens. In 1999, Hawass himself announced the discovery of an underground complex now known as the Osiris Shaft. Located near the causeway connecting the pyramids to the Sphinx, the shaft ascends over 90 feet through solid bedrock, passing through 3 levels of chambers before reaching a final room underwater. At the lowest level, explorers found a massive granite sarcophagus surrounded by smaller chambers, all carved from the bedrock with precision that rivals the pyramid itself. The official explanation frames the Osiris Shaft as a symbolic tomb and memorial representing the mythological burial place of Osiris, god of the underworld. But the structure challenges this interpretation. The shaft required advanced engineering to dig out, cutting through limestone and granite, managing groundwater, building chambers at depths that challenge even modern drilling techniques. The lowest chamber remains partly underwater, its full size unknown, its purpose unexplained. And here's the troubling detail: radiocarbon dating of organic material found in the shaft suggests it may be older than the 4th dynasty, much older. If true, this would mean the Osiris Shaft, like the Sphinx, existed before ancient Egypt. It would mean there are structures beneath Giza built by the same unknown culture that left the rain-scarred Sphinx and the mathematically encoded pyramid. Radar and seismic surveys conducted around the Sphinx have revealed similar strange things. Underground scans show voids, tunnels, and chambers beneath the monument spaces that don't match any known excavation. In the early 1990s, researchers using ground-penetrating radar detected what appeared to be a large rectangular chamber directly beneath the Sphinx's paws. The discovery created international attention and calls for excavation. Permission was denied. The area was declared off-limits. And once again, exploration stopped exactly when it seemed most promising. Why? If these chambers are simply natural voids or empty tunnels, why not open them and confirm it? If they contain nothing of importance, why block access? The pattern suggests not absence of evidence, but suppression of it, a deliberate effort to control what's discovered and, more importantly, what's revealed to the public. Consider the logic. The Great Pyramid is the most studied monument in human history. It's been measured, scanned, explored, and analyzed for centuries. And yet, every time modern technology uncovers something unexpected, a sealed door, a hidden void, an underground chamber, access is blocked, and further investigation is stopped. This isn't the behavior of archaeologists confident in their understanding. It's the behavior of institutions protecting a story from evidence that contradicts it. The shafts inside the pyramid weren't built for ventilation. They weren't symbolic soul passages. They were built with purpose, sealed deliberately, and hidden for reasons the builders didn't explain. The doors don't keep people out. They were never designed for people in the first place. They keep something in, or they preserve something behind them. Knowledge, perhaps. Objects. Evidence of the pyramid's true function. What lies beyond the second door? What exists in the voids detected by radar? What chambers remain sealed beneath the Sphinx, beneath the plateau, beneath the centuries of sand and silence? We don't know. And increasingly, it seems we're not meant to know. The pyramid was built with tolerances measured in millimeters. Its passages line up with stars. Its dimensions encode the earth. Every detail suggests planning, purpose, and intelligence. So why would the builders create shafts leading to sealed doors? Why build underground chambers at depths requiring advanced engineering? Why hide chambers beneath the Sphinx, seal them, and leave no record of their contents? The only answer that fits the evidence is the one mainstream archaeology refuses to consider. These structures were designed to preserve something. Not bodies, not treasures, something more valuable. Information, perhaps. Technology. Evidence of a culture that knew it was facing disaster, and chose to encode its knowledge in stone, in mathematics, in hidden chambers that would survive the ages. The doors were meant to be found, but only by those capable of understanding what lies beyond them. The seals weren't designed to keep grave robbers out. They were designed to protect what's inside from time itself. And we, standing on the threshold, equipped with robots and fiber optic cameras, are finally capable of opening them. But every time we reach that threshold, access is denied. The door remains closed. The chamber stays sealed. And the questions multiply in the silence. What's behind the second door? What lies beneath the Sphinx? What knowledge did the builders hide in chambers we're not allowed to explore? The pyramid doesn't guard the dead. It guards secrets. And someone, somewhere, has decided those secrets must remain buried. The robot sits idle, its camera dark. The shafts remain sealed. The voids beneath Giza stay unexplored. And the greatest mystery is no longer what the pyramid contains, but why we're being prevented from finding out. Sealed doors beneath stone are one kind of silence. But there's another kind, perhaps more disturbing. The silence of records that once existed and then vanished, erased by fire, flood, or deliberate destruction. If the builders of the pyramids left written testimony explaining their origins, where is it? And if such records once existed, what happened to them? The answer may lie in fragments, echoes of lost texts, references to manuscripts that no longer survive, stories preserved in the margins of history before they too disappeared. One such story concerns a Coptic manuscript allegedly discovered in the 19th century, a text that, if genuine, would overturn everything we believe about the pyramid's age. But the manuscript is gone now, destroyed under circumstances that remain unclear, leaving behind only descriptions, partial translations, and the haunting possibility that we once held proof of the pyramid's prehistoric origins and lost it. The story begins in the libraries of Old Cairo, where European collectors and scholars in the 1800s searched for ancient texts hidden in Coptic monasteries, private collections, and forgotten archives. During this period, Egypt was a treasure trove for collectors. Napoleon's expedition had sparked European fascination with Egyptian history, and manuscripts, papyri, and artifacts flowed out of the country into museums and private hands. Among these finds were Coptic Christian texts, writings preserved by monks who had inherited libraries from earlier Egyptian traditions, some stretching back to the Ptolemaic and Roman periods, and in rare cases, even further. One such manuscript, reportedly discovered in a monastery outside Cairo, contained a passage that stunned the collector who first read it. The text, written in Coptic script but apparently translated from an older source, described the pyramids in terms that contradicted all known history. According to those who saw it, the manuscript stated that the pyramids were built before words, meaning before written language existed, and before the river knew its place, implying a time when the Nile had not yet settled into its current course. If accurate, this would place the pyramid's construction in a period before not only ancient Egypt, but the establishment of the Nile River system as we know it. Geological studies suggest the Nile underwent significant shifts around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, as the African climate transitioned from the wet conditions of the African humid period to the dry desert environment of today. A text claiming the pyramids existed before the river knew its place would be describing a structure built during or before this climate shift thousands of years before the 4th dynasty, before writing, before recorded history. The collector who discovered the manuscript allegedly made notes and attempted a translation. He showed the text to colleagues, sparking debate about its authenticity and meaning. Some dismissed it as a medieval fake, a mystical or symbolic text, not meant to be taken literally. Others were intrigued, seeing in the manuscript echoes of older Egyptian traditions that spoke of ancient ages before the gods themselves. But before the manuscript could be properly studied, photographed, or preserved, it was destroyed. The accounts vary. Some sources claim it was lost in a fire that consumed the collector's estate. Others suggest it was deliberately burned by unknown parties. A few references hint that the manuscript was sold to a private buyer and then disappeared, its current location unknown. What remains are second-hand descriptions, fragments of translations recorded in letters and journals, and the testimony of monks who claimed their monastery had once housed the text. Why would anyone destroy such a document? If the manuscript was a forgery, a piece of historical fiction created to mystify or deceive, why not expose it as such and preserve it as a curiosity? Forgeries are valuable in their own right. They reveal the beliefs and motives of their creators, the historical context in which they were made. Scholars study forgeries precisely because they tell us what people wanted to believe, what stories they sought to construct. But this manuscript, if it was a forgery, behaves strangely. It didn't glorify Egypt. It didn't elevate the pharaohs or expand their achievements. Instead, it made them smaller, suggesting that the pyramids, Egypt's greatest monuments, weren't Egyptian at all, but relics from an earlier, unnamed culture. This is the opposite of what forgers typically do. When someone fakes an ancient text, they usually aim to enhance a civilization's prestige, to invent legendary kings, to claim ancient wisdom or divine favor. They don't erase credit from their own culture and give it to an unknown predecessor. The content of the manuscript, as described by those who claim to have seen it, lines up disturbingly well with evidence that has only recently come to light. The phrase "before the river knew its place" matches geological research showing that the Nile's course changed dramatically during the transition from the African humid period to the current dry climate. The idea of construction before words lines up with the complete absence of inscriptions inside the Great Pyramid and the lack of any contemporary 4th dynasty texts describing its construction. And the manuscript's destruction fits a broader pattern of lost records surrounding the pyramids. Consider what has vanished over the thousands of years: the contents of the Library of Alexandria, which held texts from across the ancient world, including Egyptian records before the Ptolemaic period. The archives of the Temple of Heliopolis, said to contain knowledge from Egypt's earliest dynasties, dispersed or destroyed. Numerous papyri and inscriptions lost to time, fire, conquest, and neglect. What remains is a fraction of what once existed. In this context, the lost Coptic manuscript isn't an isolated oddity. It's part of a pattern in which records that challenge the accepted timeline disappear, while texts that reinforce the conventional story are preserved and repeated. Whether by accident or design, the result is the same: alternative histories are erased, and the story we're left with is the one that survived, not necessarily the one that was true. Coptic monks, as inheritors of Egyptian Christian traditions, often preserved knowledge that dated back to pre-Christian Egypt. They translated older texts, copied manuscripts, and maintained libraries that bridged the gap between the pharaonic past and the medieval present. If the manuscript existed, it likely wasn't a Coptic original, but a translation or summary of something older, perhaps a text from the Ptolemaic period, or even earlier, preserving oral traditions or written records that reached back into Egypt's prehistoric past. The monks who reportedly housed the manuscript claimed it was part of a collection inherited from an earlier monastery, one that had stood for centuries and accumulated texts from various sources. When European collectors arrived seeking manuscripts to purchase or study, they were shown documents that included not only Christian writings, but older material: myths, legends, historical accounts that didn't fit neatly into biblical or classical frameworks. And then the manuscript was gone. Lost to fire, they said. Or sold and hidden. Or taken by parties who preferred it remain unseen. What did it truly say? We may never know. What remains are echoes, the phrases "before words" and "before the river knew its place," repeated in letters, journals, and second-hand accounts by scholars who heard of the text but never saw it themselves. These fragments are tantalizing, suggestive, but ultimately unverifiable. We can't prove the manuscript existed. We can't prove it was authentic. And we can't recover what was written on pages that no longer exist. But the story endures, and it asks a question that resonates with everything we've uncovered so far. If there were records proving the pyramids were far older than we've been taught, what would happen to them? Would they be preserved, studied, and added to our understanding of history? Or would they be dismissed, suppressed, or destroyed deliberately or conveniently because they threaten a story that's been repeated for so long it's become indistinguishable from fact? The Great Pyramid stands silent, holding no inscriptions. The Sphinx is scarred by rains from an age before Egypt. Sealed doors remain unexplored. And a manuscript that might have explained it all was reduced to ash. Memory, it seems, is fragile. Stone endures where parchment burns. And perhaps that's why the builders chose to encode their message not in words but in geometry, in alignments, in dimensions that can't be easily erased because they knew that words could be lost, scrolls could burn, but stone, if cut precisely enough, if placed deliberately enough, might survive even when memory itself is destroyed. The lost manuscript is gone. But the pyramids remain. And they still whisper what the text might have said: we are older than you know. Older than history. Older than words. The fire that consumed the manuscript may have silenced one voice, but the stones continue to speak. If the pyramids are relics of a forgotten age, if the Sphinx bears the scars of a vanished climate, if sealed chambers and lost manuscripts hint at knowledge deliberately hidden, then one question becomes unavoidable: was this phenomenon unique to Egypt? Or does the pattern extend beyond the Nile, beyond North Africa, across the ancient world itself? The answer, when you begin to look, is as unsettling as it is undeniable. Giza is not alone. Across continents, scattered through landscapes separated by oceans and thousands of years, stand monuments that challenge the accepted timeline of human civilization. Structures so old they existed before writing, so massive they challenge modern engineering, so precise they suggest knowledge that shouldn't have existed when hunter-gatherers still roamed the earth. These aren't tombs. They're not isolated achievements of individual cultures rising independently. They form a pattern, a global signature of advanced construction, precise engineering, and encoded knowledge appearing thousands of years before history claims it should, built by peoples whose names we don't know, whose purposes remain hidden, and whose very existence has been erased from the story we tell ourselves about the origins of civilization. The first and perhaps most revolutionary of these sites stands in southeastern Turkey on a barren hillside overlooking the Mesopotamian plains. It's called Göbekli Tepe, and until its excavation began in the 1990s, no one believed such a place could exist. Göbekli Tepe is 12,000 years old. To put that in perspective, it was already ancient when the first pyramids were supposedly built. It's 7,000 years older than Stonehenge. It existed before pottery, metalworking, and the wheel. It was built during the pre-pottery Neolithic period when human beings, according to every textbook, were still nomadic hunter-gatherers, living in small bands with no central authority, no surplus labor, and no capacity for monumental architecture. And yet, there it stands. The site consists of massive stone circles, each anchored by shaped pillars carved from limestone, some weighing over 10 tons. The pillars are covered with intricate carvings, animals, abstract symbols, human figures rendered with skill that rivals much later artistic traditions. The stones were quarried from bedrock, transported uphill, and set up in precise arrangements. The circles were then deliberately buried, one layer on top of another, as though the site was meant to be preserved, rather than used. But here's what makes Göbekli Tepe so disruptive: it was built before agriculture. The people who carved these pillars hadn't yet domesticated crops or animals. They had no cities, no kings, no written language. And yet they organized labor on a scale requiring hundreds of workers sustained over generations, coordinating quarrying, carving, and construction, with an efficiency that suggests not only skill but social complexity, far beyond what the timeline allows. If Göbekli Tepe can exist 12,000 years ago, then the assumption that advanced architecture requires settled civilizations, agricultural surplus, and organized states collapses. Something else was happening in the deep past, something we don't yet understand. Travel west across the Mediterranean to the mountains of Lebanon, and you encounter another impossibility. At Baalbek, in the foundations of a Roman temple complex, lie 3 stones that defy explanation. They're called the trilithon, and they're the largest work stones ever used in construction anywhere on Earth. Each block weighs between 800 and 1,000 tons. They're precisely cut, fitted together without mortar, and positioned 20 feet above ground level in the temple's foundation. Modern cranes struggle to lift 200-ton loads. The blocks at Baalbek are 5 times that weight moved into place with tolerances measured in millimeters, set so tightly that centuries of earthquakes haven't displaced them. The Romans built the temples above the trilithon, but they didn't move the stones. Roman engineers left records of their projects: aqueducts, roads, colosseums, but they make no claim to the trilithon. They built on top of it, incorporating the massive foundation into their own work, suggesting they found the stones already in place, relics of an earlier construction, whose origins even they didn't know. And in the nearby quarry, still attached to bedrock, lies an even larger stone. It weighs an estimated 1,200 tons, partially carved, abandoned mid-extraction, as though the project was interrupted and never resumed. They began cutting this stone. What technology were they using? And why did they stop? Cross the Atlantic, high into the Andes Mountains of Bolivia, and you find Pumapunku, a site that presents a different kind of impossibility. Here the mystery isn't size but precision. The stones at Pumapunku aren't the largest ever moved, but they're among the most precisely cut. The blocks are made of andesite and diorite stones harder than granite, resistant to the copper and bronze tools attributed to the Tiwanaku culture that occupied the region. And yet the stones are cut with machine-like accuracy, flat surfaces polished to near-perfect planes, right angles measured to fractions of a degree, interlocking joints that fit together like puzzle pieces, requiring no mortar, no filler, no adjustment. Some blocks contain channels and grooves carved at precise depths, as though routed by machinery. Others show drill holes with uniform diameters, the kind produced by rotary tools operating at high speeds. But the Tiwanaku, according to archaeology, had no such tools. They had no iron, no steel, no advanced metalworking. How then were these stones shaped? Skeptics suggest that the precision is overstated, that patient handwork with stone tools could achieve similar results. But when modern stonemasons attempt to replicate Pumapunku's cuts using Bronze Age technology, they can't match the accuracy. The angles are off. The surfaces remain uneven. The tolerances fail to meet the ancient standard. Something is missing from our understanding. Either the tools existed and were lost, or the techniques were far more advanced than we assume, or the timeline is wrong and these stones were cut by a culture possessing knowledge that has since vanished. Travel again, this time to the island of Malta in the Mediterranean. Beneath the surface lies the Hypogeum, an underground temple carved directly into limestone bedrock over 5,000 years ago. The structure descends through 3 levels, containing chambers, alcoves, and passages carved from solid rock, with tools that, once again, shouldn't have been capable of such work. But the true mystery of the Hypogeum isn't its age or its construction. It's its acoustics. The oracle chamber, a small room deep within the complex, resonates at 110 Hz, the exact same frequency as the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid. When sound is introduced at this frequency, the chamber amplifies it, creating a resonance so powerful it vibrates through the stone and into the bodies of those standing inside. This isn't accidental. The chamber was designed to resonate. The builders understood acoustic engineering, harmonic frequencies, and the interaction between sound and stone. They carved the space deliberately to produce this effect, shaping the walls, ceiling, and floor to create a resonant cavity tuned to a specific pitch. Why? For ritual. For healing. For altered states of consciousness. We don't know. But the parallel to the Great Pyramid is undeniable. Across thousands of miles and potentially thousands of years, 2 separate cultures built chambers tuned to the same frequency, using the same principle of resonant architecture. These sites, Göbekli Tepe, Bölbek, Pumapunku, the Hypogeum, are oddities. They're data points in a pattern, a global pattern of advanced construction, precise engineering, and encoded knowledge, appearing long before the rise of the civilizations we credit with inventing such capabilities. The pattern extends further to the underwater structures off the coast of Japan, submerged since the end of the last ice age, to the megalithic walls of Sacsayhuman in Peru, where stones weighing hundreds of tons are fitted together without mortar, to the stone spheres of Costa Rica, carved with geometric perfection for purposes unknown to the dolmens of Korea, the standing stones of Karnak, the temples of Malta. Everywhere, the same signatures appear: massive stones moved with impossible efficiency, precision cutting requiring advanced tools, astronomical alignment suggesting detailed celestial knowledge, and construction dating to periods far earlier than mainstream history allows. This isn't the work of isolated geniuses or lucky accidents. This is the fingerprint of a lost capability and knowledge system that once existed across the ancient world and then vanished, leaving behind only the monuments themselves, as proof that something greater once was. The implications are staggering. If Göbekli Tepe was built 12,000 years ago, if the Trilithon predates the Romans, if Pumapunku's precision can't be replicated with Bronze Age tools, then human history isn't the steady upward climb we imagine. It's something more complex, more cyclical, marked by rises and falls, knowledge gained and lost, civilizations that flourished and then disappeared, leaving only stones too massive to erase. The pyramids of Giza are part of this pattern. The Sphinx with its rain erosion. The Great Pyramid with its encoded mathematics and sealed chambers. The underground Osiris shaft. These aren't isolated Egyptian achievements. They're fragments of a global phenomenon, a prehistoric culture, or network of cultures, possessing capabilities that challenge every assumption we hold about the development of human civilization. And if such a culture existed, the next question becomes unavoidable: who were they? Where did they come from? And what happened to them? The stones remain. The builders are gone. But perhaps, buried in the smallest traces, genetic markers, mythological echoes, fragments of inherited memory, we can still find them. If a global culture once possessed the knowledge to build monuments like Göbekli Tepe, Bölbek, and the pyramids, then where are they? Where are the cities, the pottery, the tools, the burials that should mark their presence? Where are the bones? For decades, this absence was used as the ultimate argument against any theory of a prehistoric advanced civilization. Show us the people, archaeologists would say. Show us the remains, the settlements, the physical evidence of the culture you claim existed. And for a long time, there was no answer. The stones stood as silent testimony. But the builders themselves seemed to have vanished without a trace, leaving no skeletal proof of their existence. But in the last 20 years, a new science has emerged, one that can detect the presence of ancient peoples, even when their bones have turned to dust, their cities have been swallowed by time, and their artifacts have eroded into sand. This science is archaeogenetics, the study of ancient DNA. And it's begun to reveal something extraordinary: entire populations that once existed and then disappeared, leaving no archaeological record, no monuments, no memory, only the faint genetic signatures embedded in the DNA of peoples who came after them. They're called ghost populations, and their discovery is rewriting the story of human prehistory. The term ghost population refers to an ancestral group that contributed genetically to modern or ancient populations, but for whom we have no direct skeletal or archaeological evidence. They exist only as statistical patterns in genetic data, patterns of inheritance that can't be explained by known historical populations, shadows in the DNA that point to ancestors we've never found. The first major ghost population was identified in 2016, when geneticists analyzing ancient and modern DNA from the Near East noticed something strange. The genetic makeup of early farmers in the region contained ancestry that didn't match any known population. It wasn't from African groups, not from European hunter-gatherers, not from East Asian lineages. It was something else, something older, something that split from other human groups before any of the populations we currently know about. They named this lineage basal Eurasians. These were people who separated from the main branch of humanity that left Africa, diverging so early that they carried none of the Neanderthal DNA present in nearly all other non-African populations. They existed, thrived, and contributed to the ancestry of later Near Eastern peoples. But we've never found their bones. We've never excavated their settlements. We don't know what they called themselves, where they lived, or what they built. But their genes persist, woven into the populations that came after them, silent proof that they were here. And basal Eurasians aren't alone. Similar ghost populations have been detected across the world. In Africa, genetic studies revealed the presence of at least 4 distinct extinct human lineages that contributed to modern populations, but left no fossils. In Southeast Asia, DNA analysis has uncovered unknown archaic human groups that interbred with modern Homo sapiens, and then vanished. In Europe, ancient genomes show contributions from peoples who appear briefly in the genetic record, and then disappear, replaced by migrations we can track, but whose ultimate origins remain unclear. Nowhere is this phenomenon more pronounced than in North Africa. Studies of ancient DNA from the region reveal a complex mix of ancestries, including contributions from populations that no longer exist. Before the Sahara became a desert, before the rise of Egypt, North Africa was inhabited by peoples whose genetic signatures don't match any modern or ancient group we've identified. They lived during the African humid period, when the Sahara was green, when lakes dotted the landscape, and when rivers flowed where now there's only sand. And then, around 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, as the climate shifted and the desert expanded, these populations vanished. Some migrated south, merging with sub-Saharan groups. Others moved north and east, contributing to the ancestry of Mediterranean and Near Eastern peoples. But the core populations, the groups that lived in the Sahara itself during its green period, disappeared from the genetic record, leaving only faint traces in the DNA of their descendants. Who were they? What did they achieve? Did they build anything that has since been buried beneath the sands? We don't know. But the timeline is striking. The ghost populations of North Africa existed during precisely the period when, according to geological evidence, the Sphinx was carved and exposed to rainfall. They were present when the climate allowed for large-scale construction, when the Sahara was habitable, when a thriving culture could have developed in the region that would later become desert. And then they were gone, erased by climate change, scattered by the drying of their homeland, absorbed into other populations, or lost entirely. If such people built monuments during the Green Sahara, those structures would now lie beneath sand, their creators forgotten, their achievements credited to later civilizations that found the ruins and claimed them. This isn't speculation. This is the established pattern of human history. Climate shapes civilizations. Droughts drive migrations. Sea level rise drowns coastlines. And when the environment shifts drastically, entire cultures can vanish, their cities abandoned, their knowledge lost, their very existence forgotten within a few generations. Consider the Younger Dryas, a period of rapid and catastrophic climate change that occurred around 12,900 to 11,700 years ago. In less than a century, global temperatures plummeted, glaciers advanced, ecosystems collapsed. Evidence suggests this period was marked by widespread upheaval, megafauna extinctions, human population crashes, and the sudden abandonment of settlements across the northern hemisphere. Some researchers propose that the Younger Dryas was triggered by a cosmic impact, fragments of a comet striking the Earth, igniting wildfires, throwing debris into the atmosphere, and triggering rapid cooling. The hypothesis remains controversial, but the climatic effects are undeniable. Whatever caused it, the Younger Dryas was a bottleneck event, a moment when human survival hung in the balance, and entire cultures may have been wiped out. If an advanced culture existed before the Younger Dryas, a culture that had developed monumental architecture, astronomical knowledge, and sophisticated engineering, what would have happened to them? Their coastal settlements would have been drowned by rising seas at the end of the Ice Age. Their inland cities would have been buried by climate-driven environmental changes. Their populations would have scattered, seeking refuge in regions less affected by the catastrophe. And within a few centuries, their achievements would be forgotten, remembered only in myths of a lost golden age, a time before the flood, a civilization that vanished. This is the implication of the ghost populations. They're not just statistical artifacts in genetic data. They're evidence of real peoples, real cultures, real histories that have been erased by time and climate. And if those peoples possessed knowledge, if they built structures designed to survive catastrophe, then those structures might still exist, attributed to later cultures, misunderstood, their true origins lost. The genetic evidence lines up disturbingly well with the archaeological mysteries. The ghost populations of North Africa existed during the African humid period, when the Sahara was green, and the Sphinx shows evidence of water erosion. Basal Eurasians contributed to Near Eastern populations that later built sites like Göbekli Tepe and established the earliest agricultural societies. Ancient migrations track across the very regions where unexplained megalithic structures appear from. North Africa through the Levant, Anatolia, and into Europe. The pattern suggests not isolated achievements, but a network of related cultures connected by shared knowledge, perhaps fleeing environmental collapse, carrying with them the remnants of a more advanced prehistoric society. As the climate shifted, as the Sahara dried and the Younger Dryas devastated the northern hemisphere, these peoples moved, adapted, and in many cases vanished, leaving behind only their genes and, in a few places, their stones. Modern populations in North Africa, the Near East, and parts of Europe carry genetic markers from these ghost ancestors. The DNA persists even though the cultures themselves are gone, even though we have no names for them, no records of their languages, no certainty about what they built or believed. But the monuments remain. And now, with genetic evidence confirming that unknown populations once thrived in the exact regions and time periods where the mysteries appear, the possibility becomes harder to dismiss. The builders may not have left behind intact cities or extensive cemeteries, but they left something more permanent, their genetic legacy encoded in the descendants who survived them, and their engineering legacy carved in stone, too massive to move, too precise to erode, too mathematically sophisticated to forget. The Sahara holds secrets beneath its sands. Satellite imaging and ground-penetrating radar have revealed ancient river systems, lake beds, and the outlines of settlements buried under dunes. These aren't Egyptian. They're thousands of years older than Egypt. They belong to the ghost populations, the peoples who lived when the desert was green, who built during an age we've forgotten, and who vanished when the climate turned against them. If they carved the Sphinx, if they erected the megaliths at Nabta Playa, if they encoded astronomical knowledge into structures that later cultures attributed to themselves, then we're only now beginning to recover their story, not from texts or artifacts, but from the genetic echoes they left behind. The ghosts are real. They existed. They thrived. And when catastrophe came, whether climate shift, cosmic impact, or something else, they disappeared, leaving behind only stones and shadows in our DNA. We are their descendants. And the monuments we thought we understood may be their messages, waiting for us to finally recognize them not as tombs or temples, but as testimony from a civilization that knew it was ending, and chose to preserve what it could in the only language that transcends catastrophe: mathematics, astronomy, and stone. The desert remembers. The genes remember. And now, finally, we're learning to read what they've been telling us all along. We followed the evidence through stone and erosion, through ancient texts and sealed chambers, through genetics and global megaliths. We've seen geological proof that the Sphinx existed before Egypt, inscriptions admitting the Egyptians found monuments already ancient, mathematical encoding that challenges the timeline, sealed doors leading nowhere, lost manuscripts destroyed before they could speak, global structures built before civilization supposedly began, and ghost populations vanishing from history, leaving only their DNA and their stones. The question that began this journey, what if the Egyptians didn't build the pyramids, has led us to a deeper realization. The pyramids weren't built for the people who claimed them. They weren't built for kings or gods or the glorification of any single culture. They were built for something far more profound. They were built as memory. Not memory in the sense of monuments commemorating past events, but memory in the most essential meaning of the word: the preservation of knowledge across the abyss of catastrophe, the encoding of information in a medium designed to outlast empires, languages, and even the civilizations that might try to understand it. The pyramids are time capsules. And the message they carry isn't written in hieroglyphs or buried in scrolls. It's embedded in their geometry, their alignments, their dimensions encoded in the universal language of mathematics, astronomy, and physics. A language that doesn't depend on culture, era, or even the survival of those who created it. Consider what the builders chose to preserve. They didn't carve myths or legends into the walls. They didn't leave inscriptions proclaiming their kings or recounting their victories. They encoded Earth itself. The pyramid's dimensions mirror the planet's geometry, its radius, its circumference, the mathematical constants that govern spheres and circles. The structure aligns to true north with precision that requires understanding Earth's rotation. The shafts point to stars whose positions shift over thousands of years due to precession, the slow wobble of the planet's axis. This isn't decoration. This is data. The pyramid is a three-dimensional archive of geodetic, astronomical, and mathematical information preserved in stone because stone endures where everything else would. Papyrus, memory decays and disappears. Why would a culture choose to encode such knowledge? Why build a structure designed not for function or beauty, but for permanence and communication across time? There's only one answer: they knew what was coming. They knew that catastrophe was inevitable, that climate could shift, civilizations could fall, knowledge could be lost. They had perhaps seen it happen before, witnessed the collapse of earlier cultures, the forgetting of technologies, the reduction of advanced societies to scattered survivors struggling to rebuild from fragments. And they understood that writing, no matter how carefully preserved, is fragile. Scrolls burn. Libraries collapse. Languages evolve and become unreadable. Within a few centuries, texts become incomprehensible. Within a few thousand years, even the script itself is forgotten. But mathematics is universal. The ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter is the same today as it was 10,000 years ago, the same on every continent, in every language, for every culture that develops the concept. The alignment to true north doesn't change. The encoding of Earth's dimensions remains readable to any civilization advanced enough to measure and calculate. The pyramid is a message that doesn't rely on the survival of those who sent it. It speaks in proportions, in angles, in alignments, truths that transcend culture and language. And the message is clear. We were here. We knew things you may have forgotten. And we built this to remind you. This is why the pyramid contains no inscriptions, no burial texts, no ritual objects. It was never meant to serve the dead. It was meant to serve the future. It was built not for the kings of Egypt, but for whoever would come after the catastrophe, whoever would eventually develop the tools and knowledge to measure, analyze, and understand what had been encoded in stone. Perhaps we are those people. Perhaps, after thousands of years of misunderstanding, after centuries of assuming the pyramid was a tomb because we couldn't imagine any other purpose, we're finally reaching the level of scientific and technological sophistication required to read the message the builders left behind. The sealed doors, the hidden chambers, the voids beneath the plateau, these aren't defenses against grave robbers. They're puzzles designed to be opened only by those capable of understanding what lies within. The mathematics encoded in the structure is a key, a test of whether the discoverer possesses the knowledge necessary to interpret what comes next. And if this is true, if the pyramid is memory preserved across thousands of years, then the pattern extends beyond Giza. Göbekli Tepe, with its deliberate burial, becomes not a sacred site, but an archive sealed and protected for a future generation to uncover. Baalbek's impossible stones become foundations built to survive earthquakes and erosion for tens of thousands of years. Pumapunku's precision becomes a demonstration of capability, proof that the builders possess technology and knowledge worth remembering. The global megaliths aren't isolated achievements. They're nodes in a network, a prehistoric attempt to preserve knowledge in multiple locations, distributed across the world, so that even if one culture forgets, another might remember. Even if one continent is devastated, another might survive. Even if languages die and writing is lost, the stones will remain, carrying their message forward through time. This is the cycle. Civilizations rise, achieve greatness, and then fall, brought down by climate, catastrophe, war, or collapse. The knowledge they accumulated is lost. Their cities crumble. Their names are forgotten. And the survivors, reduced to scattered bands, must begin again from nothing, rebuilding slowly over thousands of years, until they once more reach the threshold of advancement. But if the previous civilization was wise, if they understood the cycle, they wouldn't let everything disappear. They would encode what they knew in the most permanent medium available, stone. They would build monuments designed not to glorify themselves, but to communicate with those who would come after, carrying forward the essential knowledge needed to rebuild, to remember, to avoid repeating the same collapse. The pyramids are that legacy. And we, standing now at our own threshold, facing climate change, ecological collapse, the fragility of our interconnected systems, should recognize them for what they are: not relics of a primitive past, but warnings and wisdom from a sophisticated culture that understood impermanence, that knew greatness is temporary, and that chose to leave behind something that would endure. Night returns to Giza. The stars emerge, the same stars the shafts once pointed toward, the same sky the builders mapped with such precision. The Sphinx sits in shadow, its rain-carved body a testament to ages we've forgotten. The pyramid rises against the darkness, massive and silent, its stones holding secrets we're only beginning to uncover. And in that silence, if we listen carefully, we can hear what the builders are telling us across the span of thousands of years. We were like you. We built. We knew. We thrived. And then we fell. But we didn't let everything die. We carved memory into stone so that when you rose again, when you became capable of understanding, you would know you're not the first. Civilization has come before, and it will come again. Remember what we built. Learn from what we encoded. And when your time comes, when your own civilization faces its inevitable twilight, do as we did, preserve what matters most, not in words that fade, but in stone that endures. Perhaps the pyramids weren't built for the past. Perhaps they were built for the future, for the descendants of those who survived, for the cultures that would one day rise from the ashes of what came before. For us. The desert holds its breath. The pyramid waits. And somewhere in its sealed chambers, in its unexplored voids, in the mathematics encoded in its very dimensions, the message continues, patient, permanent, and eternal. We're not the first to stand here in wonder, and we won't be the last. The cycle continues. Memory endures. And the stones, as they have for thousands of years, keep watch over a history deeper and stranger than we've ever been taught. Sleep now, beneath the stars the ancients knew. Dream of green Saharas and forgotten ages. And know that somewhere in the stones, the truth waits, carved in geometry, aligned with the heavens, preserved for the moment when we're finally ready to understand. The pyramids remember. They have always remembered. And now, perhaps, we can begin to remember too.